All right. So I got some more absolutely insane statements here for you guys from Israeli politicians and members of the Knesset who are just openly stating their genocidal ambitions. I'm also going to show you guys some various IDF TikToks and videos that have been floating around that give us a perspective in terms of what they think they're fighting for on the ground inside of Gaza. But before we get to those things, I want to just start off with this video that's been going viral over the last few days. It's an interview with this British journalist, Julia Hartley Brewer, I believe her name is, here on Talk TV. And she's talking to this guy. His name is Mustafa Barghouti. He is, a secularist. He believes in trying to form a Palestinian state through a two-state solution through non-violent means. This guy is even somebody who should be appealing to Western audiences, right? He's not Hamas, okay? But she is going to talk to him and demean him in a way that is almost incomparable to even some of the other horrible interviews that I've seen since October 7th. So let's go ahead and watch this clip.
You say you don't approve of...
And do you think that Israel is a democratic country?
I
Netanyahu
know
is
that Israel
destroying
is a democracy. They
democracy.
have elections.
No, this man is now has four courts against him because of
Yes.
4 cases of
I know.
corruption. This man knows
Okay.
if the war stops,
we
he
haven't
will
got
go
time to
jail.
do the entire history of
And that's-
Benjamin
and that's
Netanyahu,
what-
who is
this
not a
not
popular
history.
figure in Israel.
When
I'm not here to
speak
defend
about
Benjamin
Palestinian
Netanyahu.
rights,
Mustafa, is it possible to...
Whenever I speak,
Right.
whenever I speak about Palestinian rights or
No.
Palestinian situation, you claim it is history. I'm talking about what's happening today.
No, I know, and
this
I'm
is
trying
not
to-
history.
Can we just... You talked about how you don't want Israel, you're saying Israel, that October the 7th happened, you're placing that in historical context. I understand that. Please don't say that again. We don't have time for it. You've made that point 5 times already.
I don't know
Okay.
what you have time
Oh my
for. Let
God,
me
for
explain
the love
myself.
of God, let me finish a sentence, man. Maybe you're not used to women talking. I don't know. But I'd like to finish a sentence, sir. Anyway, so...
No, you are misleading the public now
Really?
by explaining
Right, I've got
these
20
things that
seconds
you
left.
just
I'm not
said.
even going to bother trying to
And,
answer.
what
If you
do-
don't think
ask me the
Israel's
question.
reaction is acceptable, what would have been an acceptable reaction to you? You've got 10 seconds left.
To end occupation and allow peace to prevail for both people.
That's their react. Brilliant. Yeah. Sorry to have, been a woman speaking to you, but there you are. Doctor.
Okay, so, what the fuck? I mean, obviously, the 2 jabs that she sorted in there, right? Well, you're not used to a woman speaking, right? I mean, it's pure racism. I really don't know any other way to characterize that. The implication is that, this guy is an Arab, he's a Palestinian, therefore, he must have no respect for women, which is why he won't let me talk over him and scream at him during this interview? I mean, what are we doing here, man? I mean, this guy is very knowledgeable on this subject. He has been working with Palestinian groups to try to organize, again, for a secular, peaceful resolution to the conflict for both sides. And she's talking to him as if he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? And the point that he's trying to make there, which she just kind of glosses over as if it's like a ridiculous point to make about the broader historical context and how Israeli occupation led to October 7th, right? Which should be like the central focus of many of these conversations. And she acts as if that's like a totally ridiculous point to bring up. No, that's kind of important there, right? But she wants to have a simple conversation where October 7th came out of nowhere, right? It's as simple as all Palestinians are terrorists. Everything that Israel has done since October 7th, that's all been justified. And let's just wrap it up and have an easy conversation. She doesn't want to have a meaningful conversation because that meaningful conversation, if it's accurate and based in reality and is critical of Israel, it's going to be difficult for her to have that conversation. So she just treats him like shit. I mean, this is not what a journalist is supposed to do. If you're having somebody on like Mustafa Barghouti, who knows what he's talking about, a very smart man, okay, who's experienced in this sphere, maybe let him explain his position and stop shouting over him as if you know everything. You don't. Clearly, basically, it seems like you know fucking nothing about this. So that was insane, right? And again, I can't get over the racism that is implied there, that anti-Arab, anti-Muslim trope. Well, you're Palestinian. You must not be used to women talking. Get over yourself. And so now we move on to some of these other Israeli politicians, right? So this is one who is a member here of the Israeli Knesset, right? A government official. Not even kidding here. This is what she said. Openly celebrating, calling for starvation to be used as a tactic of war. Without hunger and thirst among the Gazan population, we will not be able to recruit collaborators. We will not be able to recruit intelligence. We will not be able to bribe people with food, drink, medicine in order to obtain intelligence. And we know that finding the abductees is a supreme and super important goal alongside the goals of fighting. Says Tali Gottlieb. Okay? Openly saying, in public, in front of cameras, we need to starve the population of Gaza. Collective punishment, a war crime, completely illegal. They don't give a fuck. We need to use starvation as a tactic, because if people are starving and they're on the brink of death, then we can use food, water, and medicine in order to bribe them to help us in our offensive. This is the government we're supporting. This is the government that the Joe Biden administration is insisting, oh, they're not committing war crimes. They're not trying to commit a genocide. Of course not. They're following in accordance with international law. I mean, the siege on Gaza since October 7th, obviously the blockade went years and years and years before October 7th on the Gaza Strip, but the total and complete siege, when from the outset they said, we're cutting off the food, the electricity, the water, everything, that in and of itself is a war crime. It's collective punishment. And not only have they done that, okay, not only are they preventing medicine from getting into Gaza, which, calls back to the story I covered in my previous video today, 10 limbs of children being lost on a daily basis, many of them amputated without anesthetic because they don't have medical supplies in Gaza. All of that is now being openly stated as a goal, as a tactic of the war. So this is why when I say things like, it's ridiculous for Biden to come out and make appeals that Israel needs to do more to help the Palestinians who are suffering in Gaza, the reason I push back on that is because it is a tactic of the war. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is not a oopsie daisy, right? It's not something they've been desperately trying to avoid. No, it's been something they have been intentionally inflicting on the Palestinian population there to try to bring them to their knees. That is what is happening. They're openly stating it. We also had this one. A reminder here from Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister inside of Israel, a settler. Israel's finance minister tonight, 2 million Nazis are sitting in Gaza. Similar to what Isaac Herzog, the president, said towards the beginning of this offensive. Oh, this idea that there's innocent civilians in Gaza, it's not true. They're all responsible for Hamas. I mean, I've seen countless Israeli representatives say the same thing over and over and over again. I've seen U.S. representatives say the same thing. Remember Brian Mast, that asshole who wore an IDF uniform into Congress, wore the uniform of a foreign country's military into Congress, and went on to say, this idea of Palestinian civilians, it's not true. We wouldn't be so light to say, innocent Nazi civilians. The ploy to call Palestinians Nazis, I mean, number one, it's just obviously so lazy, right? As if the goal of the Palestinian movement is to kill all Jews around the world. No, they're trying to fight for their own rights. They're trying to end an occupation, end an apartheid, fight for statehood, dignity, right? That's what that movement is broadly about and should be characterized as. But they characterize them as Nazis because that's the easiest thing in the book, right? If they're Nazis, well then in many people's minds that justifies doing anything to them, right? You can't reason with Nazis, right? You just have to kill all of them. You have to defeat all of them. Which also ties in to another point that people seem to be making, which bothers the shit out of me. Just a complete rewriting of World War II and the immediate aftermath of World War II. Because Israeli representatives, US representatives in defense of Israel, even Netanyahu has done this himself. They'll bring up things like the bombing of Dresden, right? And they'll say well, look at what you guys did, the Americans, the British, look at what you guys did in order to defeat the Nazis. You conducted mass bombing campaigns of civilians, which is true. We did do that. You know what that is? A war crime. Not a good thing. And there have been many, historians and military experts who've come to the conclusion that that mass killing of civilians didn't even help in the war effort to defeat the Nazis. What helped much more was the bombing of supply lines, the bombing of maybe chemical plants or military production facilities, right? So, number one, it doesn't even work. Number two, it's an obvious war crime. Number three, why do you think that we established an entire new set of international laws and norms surrounding warfare after World War II? It's like they completely blanked that out of their memories. Why do we have the Geneva Convention? Why do we have the Nuremberg trials? Why do we even hold anybody accountable after World War II if you're then going to use the actions that were taken in World War II and say, we should do that again? That gives us a justification, right? The mass bombing of Dresden, okay, well, that means we should be able to do that to Gaza. No, that's not a good thing. Maybe people should have been held accountable for that. That's a war crime. We established an entirely new set of international laws for how we should conduct warfare, specifically because of the mass atrocities of World War II. But they use that as a justification. It's absolutely mind-blowing. We also have here another one. Israeli lawmaker from the ruling Likud party, right, Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, calls for the annihilation of Gazans. Just as it is clear that the Israeli right wing was right, today everyone says it is clear all Gazans must be annihilated. When somebody says all Gazans must be annihilated, do you think that they're talking about going after Hamas, the hunt for Hamas, a targeted military campaign to remove the people who conducted the October 7th attack inside of southern Israel? No, they're talking about all Palestinians, men, women, children. This is why Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly cited the story of Amalek, right? The biblical story of Amalek, where they go in and they kill the men, the women, the children, the ox, the camel, the sheep, everything. That's why he referenced that, because it's not a targeted campaign. Anybody who's pretending like it is delusional. They're not looking at what Israeli politicians are saying openly. I mean, this is why I always say, you don't even need to look at what's happening on the ground. You should, and that would be evidence in and of itself. But the hardest part to prove about a genocidal campaign under international law is the intent aspect of it. And we have video after video after video of Israeli politicians, officials, representatives openly saying that their goal is genocidal. It's not hidden. It's not a difficult case to make. And that's why, again, I think that South Africa is probably going to be successful at the International Court of Justice, and why Israel is freaking out about that. We have another one here. I mean, this is an Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom. Now, she's been on an absolute tear recently. Now, this one is in English, so I'll play you guys this video. But this one is almost as insane as the first one we watched.
Those areas must be destroyed. And one of the things we exposed to the world after getting into the areas in Gaza, that we try to find all those tunnels and the underground metro city that Hamas has built, thanks to this great support of Iran, Qatar, the international community generosity, everything turned to be this horrible terror city. One of the things we realized that every school, every mosque, every second house has an access to tunnel. So this is, and of course ammunition.
But that's an argument for destroying the whole of Gaza, every single building in it.
So do you have another solution how to destroy the underground tunnel city, that this is the place where the terrorists hide, where they have all their ammunition, and this is the rockets that are still fired on Israeli cities?
Okay, so again, openly saying, well, the only thing we can do is to destroy the entirety of Gaza. She explicitly says it. We need to destroy all of the hospitals, the schools, the mosques, everything, because there's a tunnel entrance. I mean, these tunnels, yeah, there are tunnels all over Gaza. Many of those tunnels were built to try to smuggle food and other supplies that Israel would not allow into Gaza. That's why many of those tunnels exist. Many other of the tunnels and the underground facilities that exist, some of them were built by Israel. Like, I believe in Al-Shifa, that underground bunker that they went in and exposed was built by Israel back in the 1980s, right? So you have things like that. But even if I'm taking at face value, okay, some of these tunnels obviously are being used by Hamas, right? Well, the underlying question here, if you're trying to say, how do we defeat Hamas? Hamas represents an idea. Hamas represents the idea of violent resistance, right? In many cases using tactics I don't agree with, but it represents the idea of failed peaceful resolutions to the Israeli-Palestinian situation throughout decades and decades and decades, Israel's continued occupation, continued expansion of illegal settlements, and kicking Palestinians off their land. It represents a violent resistance movement to that. So if Hamas exists as a violent resistance group to occupation, then how do you get rid of that? Is it going to be with a military campaign where you're going in and vastly disproportionately, over 90% or so, killing civilians, while barely even getting any Hamas militants along the way? Is that going to be how you eliminate Hamas? No, it's a political solution that is required, not a military solution. And don't even just take my word for it. We now have Israeli generals. We have the top general in the United States, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, about a month ago at this point, came out and said Israel's not going to be able to eliminate Hamas. They're all starting to admit this at this point. It is a futile project to try to eliminate Hamas. I mean, you are radicalizing people in the process of this campaign. And I don't know how many, the specific number of Hamas militants who have been killed. It's difficult to get a reliable estimation on that. But even if the number is in the thousands, right? Even if it's 3,000 or 4,000, then what are you saying? You're saying if we project out from how many civilians have been killed versus Hamas militants, in order to eliminate all of these current Hamas militants, like 30, 40,000 of them, you would need to kill like 400,000, 500,000 civilians in Gaza. Is that what you're going to do? I mean, it is preposterous to think that this is going to be solved in a meaningful way with a military campaign. You've already flattened the entirety of the northern strip of Gaza. You're still bombing in the south, right? You are destroying the mosques, the schools, the refugee camps, the UN shelters. All of these things are being destroyed. There's not much more you can do if your only solution to this situation is a military solution. And yet they're still pushing full speed ahead. I promise you guys, they will not eliminate Hamas. It is not possible. It is such a ridiculous, preposterous idea. And so now I want to move on to this, which is some of the IDF videos that have been floating around. I mean, again, just give you a perspective in terms of their mentality on the ground. Now, I've seen dozens of these that have been going around, Israeli soldiers who are, proposing to each other such a sweet way. One of them I literally, was blowing up a building and said, I'm doing this like for my daughter at home. It's her birthday, right? Shit like that, okay? Just despicable things that are happening. People looting shit, people who are making like goofy TikToks with music in the background, and they're doing skits inside of the houses of Palestinians who they forced out and then burning down the houses when they leave. I'm not exaggerating. Here's one example of that. I'm going to mute this one. So this one, I mean, obviously you see these soldiers down here at the bottom, right? They're holding beers in their hand. Look at that destruction. I mean, blowing up an entire city block, smoking, having a beer, doing a little cheers with each other. I mean, if you don't think that the goal here is just mass destruction of the Palestinians in Gaza, I don't know what to tell you. They're putting it out on video. They're not hiding it. Here's another one. Now this guy in the IDF, I mean, some of the shit they're posting on TikTok, I think a lot of it is because they don't understand, or maybe they don't care, but I think that they don't understand that some of the shit that is funny to them in Israel, some of the shit that may play for, a very bloodthirsty Israeli audience right now in the aftermath of October 7th who wants the destruction of Gaza, some of the stuff that will play well for that audience is going to come across as absolutely psychopathic to an American audience who are watching this, especially young people who are on TikTok, right? I mean, this guy, for all those asking why there is no education in Gaza, we bombed them. That sucks. That's how you will never become engineers anymore. And this is exactly what they've been doing. They've been blowing up universities, schools, children, obviously, people who could grow up to have a bright future. Another one here. British-born Israeli soldier Levi Simon recorded a video of him searching Gaza homes for supposed weapons, claiming to find money instead. He then proceeds to rummage through the personal belongings, making derogatory comments about drawers filled with lingerie and nightwear. So they're just walking around, under the guise of, I'm looking for weapons, and just like looting people's houses and rummaging through their underwear drawers and publicly posting videos like this. I mean, I'm astounded at this point at how bad Israeli online PR has been. I mean, every single one of these videos that comes out that people see, less and less support for Israel. People are starting to wake up to how insane this offensive has been. And it doesn't help their cause when their own troops are posting shit like this and openly admitting what their goals are. I just wanted to touch on a couple other things here before I end this video, on some of the other egregious updates that we've gotten out of Gaza, right? So that's a lot of the media stuff. We also had this. I mean, updates. I showed you guys the previous videos of the men who have been stripped down inside Gaza, mass arrests of innocent civilians, not Hamas militants, random civilians, right? Teachers, UN workers, whatever the case may be, stripped down, forced into these large groups, hurdled. I mean, it looks, huddled together. It looks almost as if like they're being forced into concentration camps at this point inside of Gaza. And who knows what's actually happening to them at the end of the day. But this was another one of those videos that was floating around recently. I mean, you see these men stacked up here in the back of this truck. They're forcing them to speak out against Hamas or whatever the case may be. We also had reports like this. There are more and more reports of this kind. Hani Mahmoud of Al Jazeera reports that Israeli soldiers called a man out from Gaza to exit his house. An Israeli drone then killed him with a bullet to the head. When his nephew came out to check on him, he was killed too. Drones hovering around people's houses, telling them to come out, and then shooting them in the head and killing them, right? And now more on, some of these mass rounding up that we've seen over the last number of months here. This was from 972 magazine, who also did that great report that I covered on the AI mass assassination factory, where Israel is using, AI programs to determine where they're going to bomb and targeting what they call power targets, which means civilians and civilian infrastructure, to try to pummel the Palestinian people into submission. And so the same outlet did a report on the torture that has been reported inside Israel's torture camp for Gaza detainees. I mean, look at this image here, man. Look at this image. These are not Hamas militants. These are just random guys. They say in early December, images circulated worldwide showing dozens of Palestinian men in the city of Beit Lahia in the northern of the Gaza Strip who were stripped to their underwear, kneeling or sitting hunched over, and then blindfolded and put into the back of Israeli military trucks like cattle. The vast majority of these detainees were civilians with no affiliation to Hamas. Israeli security officials later confirmed, and the men were taken away by the army without notifying their families of the detainees' whereabouts. Some of them never returned. Sounds like hostage-taking to me, right? I mean, there are hundreds of hostages that have been taken by Israel since October 7th, if not thousands. And this also ties in, some of them were never returned. Who knows what happened to them? Maybe they were killed, right? Maybe they were taken back to Israel and are currently being tortured there. But I've shown you guys the other reports that we've gotten of just, summary executions in the street in Gaza. There was one where a man, they took all of the men from a family that was hiding in some location, and they killed some of the men. They threw a grenade into a room that had children in it, that had women in it. I mean, just field executions of civilians. They say 972 magazine and local call spoke with 4 Palestinian civilians who appeared in these photos or were arrested near the scene and taken to Israeli military detention centers, where they were held for several days or even weeks before being released back to Gaza. Their testimonies, along with 49 video testimonies published by various media outlets of Palestinians arrested in similar circumstances in recent weeks in the northern districts of Zaytun, sorry, I'm going to butcher these names, Jabalia and Shujuya, indicate systemic abuse and torture by Israeli soldiers against all of the detainees, civilians, and combatants alike. They say, according to these testimonies, Israeli soldiers subjected Palestinian detainees to electric shocks, burned their skin with lighters, spat in their mouths, and deprived them of sleep, food, and access to bathrooms until they defecated on themselves. Many were tied to a fence for hours, handcuffed, and blindfolded for most of the day. Some testified to having been beaten all over their bodies and having cigarettes extinguished on their necks or backs. Several people are known to have died as a result of being held in these conditions. So just mass arresting any, fighting age men, as they call them, even if they have absolutely no connection to Hamas whatsoever, and torturing them, some of them being tortured to death. This is the country that we are giving our weapons to. This is the country that the Biden administration is fully backing in this campaign. We also had this. Shark tanks with Gaza as a testing ground, Israeli defense startups flourish. So I'll link this down below. I mean, this is a good story as well by Haaretz here. But basically, I mean, there are so many of these different weapons manufacturing companies, surveillance companies, tech companies inside of Israel that use Gaza, that use the West Bank and their human rights abuses there to test out all of their new cool little gadgets, right, for these companies. And then the companies take some of the experience that they have using these weapons, surveillance, all of that on Palestinians, and then they use that to say, these are battle-tested technologies, and they go and they sell them on the fucking markets. I mean, a testing ground. Tech startups flourishing in this. The war industry is as despicable as it gets. We also had this. The maps are ready, the conference that calls for a settlement in the Gaza Strip's first publication. So apparently the Knesset, their parliament, is hosting a conference on building settlements in Gaza. We've seen this floated by guys like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and many others as well. I mean, this is something that is seriously being considered inside of Israel. Conquering Gaza, expelling the Palestinians in a Nakba 2.0, and then settling the land. I mean, going back to the IDF TikToks, I've seen TikToks of like, there was this one of this girl in the IDF who was taking a picture of herself on a beach inside of Gaza and saying, I'm going to come back here later and, once we've taken over this land, and I'm going to take a picture in my bikini because this will be our beach, right? So clearly a lot of the soldiers think that's exactly what's going to happen. Clearly a lot of members of parliament want that to happen. Clearly members of Netanyahu's own government want that to happen. This is why Netanyahu himself has been floating around, oh, well, let's push all of the Gazan residents into the Sinai Peninsula, right? Where I guess they can just go out into the desert and die. Now, I want to finish off with all of that brutal stuff, with somewhat of a positive light here. So this is a member of the Knesset, Ofer Kasif, who has been critical of Israel in the past. He's called himself an anti-Zionist. I highly recommend you guys go look into this guy. He's one of the bright spots inside of the Israeli government. And he was actually suspended, I think, for like 45 days from the Knesset for being critical of Netanyahu's government and of Zionism and all of that. And he came out recently and actually said he's going to join the South Africa genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. He said, "My constitutional duty is to Israeli society and all of its residents, not to a government whose members and its coalition are calling for an ethnic cleansing and even actual genocide. Those who hurt the country and the people are the ones who led South Africa to turn to The Hague, not me and my friends. I will not give up the struggle for our existence as a moral society. That is true patriotism, not wars of revenge and calls for destruction, not unnecessary bloodshed, and not the sacrifice of civilians and soldiers in futile wars." He's 100% correct. So credit to him. This is a difficult thing to do, right? I know you may look at that and say, well, that's the bare minimum. In Israel, this is a fucking difficult thing to do. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets suspended. Wouldn't be surprised if he even could be facing arrest for these kinds of comments, right? We've seen other people in Israel, Israeli citizens, who have been arrested for even showing sympathy with Palestinians in Gaza. And this man is going out of his way to join in with the genocide case against his own country, against his own government, knowing what potential repercussions may come from that. So credit to him. And, all of this is just a reminder. It's a reminder in terms of how honestly racist and despicable our Western media outlets can be when covering this kind of an issue. Obviously, we just watched that video, but also like the CNN report I talked about a couple days ago, letting the IDF censor some of their coverage of the campaign inside of Gaza, right? So it ties into the media aspect of this. It also ties into the media aspect of it in the sense that, like, you guys shouldn't have to have me show you these videos of these Israeli politicians saying these genocidal things. This should be like front page news. This should be on every media outlet whenever they say things like this, because that gives you an actual insight in terms of what they want, what they are saying to their own domestic audience. That's important. But what you get from the US media is basically just like, well, who knows what their plan is, right? Oh, well, Biden is still pushing for a two-state solution. It's just delusional. They pretend as if we cannot see what these Israeli politicians are saying, either behind closed doors or in front of fucking cameras. They just ignore it, right? And when they do report on it, it's vague and it's couched, and somebody like Itamar Gavir, Smotrich, they come out and they say some insane shit, and then, everybody in the US media is like, well, these are fringe people in Israeli society. Fringe? They're some of the highest positions in the entire government under Netanyahu. These are the people he formed his government with. You think he doesn't agree with them? You think he doesn't sympathize with their position at all? I mean, all of it is just, it's so despicable, it's so disgusting, it's so disappointing to see my country supporting this, to see the media in my country completely failing at any level that you want to look at it. And, eventually this has to stop, right? I mean, you need an immediate ceasefire, number one. That's not even close to the bare minimum anymore. Beyond that, you are going to need to actually, if we want international law to mean anything whatsoever, right, you have to actually bring to account the people who are responsible for all of this bloodshed, right? You need to have, trials for everybody, right? You need to have trials for Hamas, that when they committed war crimes, sure, go after them. You need to go after Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and the rest of these Israeli politicians calling to nuke Gaza, to flatten Gaza, to annihilate all Palestinians. I mean, there needs to be actual serious accountability once this is all over, hopefully soon. But whenever it is, there needs to be actual consequences for the people who are perpetrating this and the people who are helping them to perpetrate this genocidal campaign.